What does it take to make a good recording? Well, if you look around online for the answer to this question, you'll find a bunch of answers, and they are surprisingly consistent. This is the standard practice in most what I'll call pop, like non-classical, non-jazz styles of music, and for a lot of good reasons. It facilitates an efficient, modern workflow and a very specific type of recording. Now, I'm not talking about like analog versus digital or vinyl versus streaming. I'm talking about like what a recording is. In this video, I'm going to talk a little bit about the purpose of recording and its relationship with my ceaseless craving for imperfect music. The first thing I want to do is take you back to a time when recording looked like this. I found this image on the website for the Library of Congress in an area where they're talking about the National Jukebox, which itself is an incredible project. You can see an ensemble with players playing a variety of instruments, strings, some brass or woodwind, and there's even like a drum over there in the far right corner. They're all huddled around something that looks like a cone or like a megaphone. That device is called a recording horn, and it was the key to making sound recordings in what's referred to as the acoustic era of recording. Here are some details from the Library of Congress. In sound recording, the acoustical era is from the 1890s until 1925. During this time, all sound recordings were made by mechanical means without the use of microphones or amplification. To make a sound recording prior to 1925, instrumentalists, singers, and speakers performed in front of a flared metal horn, which gathered and funneled sound waves toward a thin diaphragm at the small end of the horn. There were no electronic tone controls. All adjustments to the sound were made by altering the performer's position relative to the horn or by trying different horns of differing sizes or diaphragms of varying thickness. This explains a lot about what you see in this image. These players are huddled around a recording horn because that's what's going to pick up the sounds that they're producing. They're seated at varying distances from the horn in order to create the mix, the sonic mix that's being recorded, and they're performing a take together in that space, hoping to get it right. Try to imagine how that recording sounded. It probably sounded something like this. I can't sleep at night. Or maybe like this. Those are recordings made before 1925, and they have a characteristic sound. It's mostly due to the technology that was used to make recordings at that time. But that technology dictated a specific recording process, and the sound of those recordings is heavily influenced by that process. It's the process that you see in this picture, and it's very different from the kind of process that someone would use today. I think those differences should be obvious, but just for fun, let's imagine that you could pluck those players out of the 1920s and record exactly what they were performing or about to perform. Now imagine how that combined sound would sound. Probably very little like a recording from the 1920s. One difference can be traced all the way back to 1925 when Western Electric combined microphone and amplifier to create a system that was much better at recording sound than the earlier mechanical acoustic system. Electrical recording, as it was known, was revolutionary. You could record instruments with more clarity, with more separation between the individual sounds. And eventually, with more technology, you could do multi-tracking. You could add artificial reverb. You could record in stereo. The sum of those factors allows us today to record sounds that are really different from what could have been recorded in the 1920s. And most people would say that those differences are clear improvements. But let's instead think of them as differences and consider whether there are trade-offs that we don't think about today because it's just the way it's always been in our lifetimes. One of those trade-offs is that the modern approach to recording changes what you are recording. All recording allows us to extract a moment from the time-space continuum and preserve it. But early recordings were focused on capturing a specific moment of performance that happened at a specific time and place. It had to, as a function of the available technology. The players sat together in a room and they played together, and the recording apparatus captured whatever happened in the room, and if it was good, they kept it, and if it wasn't good enough, they would all do another take. As you can imagine, these sessions often involved many takes before getting to a best take, but even those best takes had inherent flaws. Let's take an easy example. If you've ever been near a drum, even a simple drum like this cajon, you know the characteristics of a great drum sound. It's big, thick, percussive, powerful, and it is loud. Louder than a lot of other instruments that you might want to hear in the mix. So if it's 1920 and you're recording an ensemble that has a drum and a cello in it, how do you ensure that the drum doesn't drown out the cello? The solution at the time was to send the drummer to the other side of the room. And that approach worked because at that distance, the sound of the drum wouldn't overpower the sound of the cello or any of the other instruments. But there was a cost, because at that distance, you weren't really recording the sound of the drum. You're recording the sound of that drum that has bounced off of the ceilings and walls and over the heads of the other players and eventually made its way over to the horn. It's thinner, it's less percussive, less punchy. It's a fundamentally different sound. And people at the time knew that they were making that compromise. And they were willing to make it because they wanted to have the drum in the session. But in a modern recording session, you would never have to make that kind of compromise. You would chase the ideal sound of a drum, and you go out of your way to avoid the room sound that was inextricable from these early recordings. You'd think of it as a flaw that had to be corrected. And the truth is that in these early recordings, every single sound of every instrument had similar flaws. I struggle with that idea because I love a lot of music from that era, and it's hard for me to think of a song like Sugarfoot Stomp as being flawed. It sounds different from a modern recording, from the modern era, but why can't we think of those differences as characteristics of the recording? The obvious answer is because a different approach sounds better. But that just makes me wonder whether there are reasons why these characteristics of old-fashioned or bad recording technique might actually be good. Here's a reason for you, one of many. Those recordings are accurate or realistic to the sound that was produced in the room. They preserve what a person would have heard if they had been standing right in front of the recording horn when all of those performers performed. And of course, the recordings don't preserve all of that sound. They lose a bunch of frequencies, which provide a lot of the detail of what those sounds were like in the real world. But they do preserve a lot of information about what that sound was like in the brief, fleeting moment when it existed. All recordings have the power, the amazing power, to transport a person through time and space. Modern recordings even have the power to transport a person to a place that never really existed, that could never exist. I mean, there was only one Freddie Mercury, and even on his best night, he could only sing to you in one voice. But the recording of Bohemian Rhapsody transports you to a place where there are a dozen Freddies all singing in harmony together. That's a really cool place to be, and I think that most pop recordings since the mid-60s have been trying to take us to that type of place, because they can. The technology makes that possible. And don't get me wrong, I love that kind of fantasy music. Most of my favorite music easily falls into that category. But part of me yearns to be transported somewhere else, to a place that feels a little more real. Maybe that explains my love for live recordings. Lonely. And demos.
If tomorrow wasn't such a long time.
And even modern recordings made with more of a low-tech approach.
Indian summer, I need some return.
It certainly explains my love of a YouTuber whose name I cannot pronounce. There it is. In her videos, she performs what I assume to be original songs by herself in what seems to be the place where she lives. I like her skills and her songs, but I'm mostly drawn in by her approach. It feels intimate, honest, and clear. And yes, I recognize that these are still performances, but she doesn't surround herself with signs of modern social media marketing. She just plays the songs in front of a camera, and through that video invites me into the moment where she makes that music. I cherish the human element of these and similar performances, a lot like the way that I cherish a candid photo or handwritten text. These things are naturally imperfect, but they contain some essence of the person who made them. A real person in the real world. Person like me that I can relate to, and I want to experience that person, to be transported into their world. And in a way, flawed, imperfect recordings act as a really effective wormhole into another person's world. In fact, that's the way that I think about the music and videos that I make. I don't think about any of it as art, mostly because I don't expect other people to experience what I make as art. Instead, I think of it as a form of communication, like this weird, permanent pathway between my world and your world. And when I think about the stuff that I make and how much I like it, one of the factors I consider is how well is this functioning as a wormhole. I'm proud of my most recent song.
I remember you waving like I was sand.
But I'm not sure it was a very good wormhole. It was too clean, too polished, too dry. You can hear the specific sounds that I recorded on each track, but in most cases, you can't hear anything else. There's very little audible connection to the specific moment in time when I was performing that song. And as I have reflected on that recording, listened back, I miss that kind of information. So in my next song, I wanted to prioritize it. So I set up here in the shed to record vocals and electric guitar at the same time on a small number of mics and in a single take. And I won't lie to you, it wasn't pretty. But man, God, it's so hard. But I kept going, and I did eventually make it through the entire song with what felt like a pretty strong performance, but it was nowhere near a perfect performance. I made some mistakes on guitar, I puffed out some really potent plosives, and I started to lose my voice like halfway through, so I had to fight my way to completion. And those are just factors related to performance. I haven't even talked about the recording, which was imperfect, as you might expect for a performance recorded only with a close mic for vocals and a PZM mic to pick up the sound of guitar and vocals in the room. Now, in another person's process, any one of those imperfections would have been a good reason to do another take or to start punching in to improve my existing take. But I decided not to do any of that because I like the performance. Despite its flaws, it has energy and dynamics that I cherish, and it sounds like what it is, an amateur standing in a small shed singing his ass off a song that almost no one cares about. I like that because it's real. That's who I am. And everything that I am as a writer and musician, everything I have to say is bound up in that identity. I am those imperfections, and I am sort of proud of them. I think they're a little like fingerprints. If you're expecting something that's clean and clear and perfect, they might just seem to smudge the image, but they're also a sign of me, of my identity, the fact that I was in fact there. And I hope those factors help you lean into and through my music, into the time and place that I made that music. Despite the constant swirling, surreal experience of participating in the internet, we are all still regular human beings living in the world, trying to do things in the world. And I like the idea of capturing some of that part of a human life in the stuff that we make. Okay, that's all I have to say. I hope some of it made sense. Let me know what you think in the comments, but before you do, let me say thank you for making it this far, and I hope you enjoy what's coming up, which is the core track for my next song. Like I said before, it's pretty bare bones. It's just vocals and guitar and flaws, but I'm pretty happy with it, and I'm interested to see if it serves as a good wormhole. I guess you can be the judge as well and tell me when you see the fully arranged version next week. Until then, thank you so much for your time. Take care of yourselves, and I will see you around. One more try. We're going to do it one more time.
I peek through the curtain of bangs over your left eye. And fingertips burn as my hands press against your sides. The DJ plays songs from 2005, and we dance like shadows in the neon light of that old flame burning again. That old flame, it's not the same. Still I'm begging that old flame,
to start burning again, or for that old flame to let me go. You look like a picture and smile like you're reading my mind. And we flow like a river that's never been frozen in ice. I know that we're broken and we never change, but when you start to smolder, I can't look away from that old flame burning again. That old flame, it's not the same. Soon I'm begging that old flame to start burning again, for that old flame to let me go. While driving you home, I think of the light that flickered above your doorway that night, and the moths that fluttered overhead when your lips met mine. I rolled down the window, but I know it's too late. Your smoke's in my veins, and I'm drawn like a moth into that old flame, burning again. That old flame, it's not the same. Still I'm begging that old flame to start burning again, or for that old flame to let me go. I'm begging that old flame to burn. I'm begging that old flame to burn. I'm begging that old flame to burn. I know you still can't look away, 'cause I'm drawn like a moth into that old flame. That might have been it.